A new round of flooding has emerged in upstream Yangtze River and is moving downstream fast. An expert says this is creating a dilemma for the Three Gorges Dam. Rumors of Chinese banks collapsing are flooding social media in China. Worried customers have descended on several banks to withdraw their money. Police took people into custody, accusing them of spreading rumors. Half of China's important agricultural provinces have been impacted by the biggest flooding in decades. Peasants and the authorities are giving different pictures about food supply for this year. Part of the plaque at the entrance to Wuhan City Hall is missing. One woman reportedly cut it off with an axe. With the virus cover-up flooding and less support from authorities, dissatisfaction in Wuhan is rising. Beijing said on Friday any travel ban against Communist Party members would mean Washington stands against the entire Chinese population. But Chinese people took to social media to say they actually welcome the ban. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Chinese authorities warn a new round of flooding is emerging in upstream Yangtze River and is quickly moving downstream. An expert says the new flooding has created a dilemma for the Three Gorges Dam. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
China's famous Three Gorges Dam is seeing a new round of powerful flooding, and authorities say a new round of flooding for the Yangtze River is on its way. It'll likely arrive in Wuhan, located downstream from the dam, in about 4 days. In the meantime, the Three Gorges Dam is already facing pressure from discharged floodwaters. That's as the dam's water level continues to climb. This expert says there's a dilemma in dealing with the water behind the dam.
If the Three Gorges Dam discharges a lot of floodwater at this time, it will make the flooding in Wuhan even worse. To protect Wuhan, the dam can't discharge too much water.
Wuhan is located downriver from the dam and is already in a difficult situation. Home to over 11 million people, Wuhan's embankment has been seeing its water level consistently exceed flood warning levels for the past week. The water is expected to remain at this level for the next 2 weeks. But on the other hand, Huang says if enough water isn't released, the upstream area of Chongqing could soon be submerged. Chongqing sits at a higher latitude than the Three Gorges Dam, so the region's water level is always well above the level inside the dam. If the dam doesn't release enough water coming upstream, then Chongqing, an important economic center in western China with a population almost 3 times that of Wuhan, could be in trouble. And parts of the region already are. This Thursday, local authorities issued multiple flood alerts within 3 hours. That's as internet users posted video of water bursting into an office and people fleeing their homes to escape. Heavy rains are expected over southern China in the next 3 days. Authorities have already alerted cities located downstream of the dam. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
Overnight, almost an entire Chinese city has been submerged. Cars can even be seen floating down city roads. The scene was captured inside Hubei province. It's located about 300 miles east of Wuhan. Authorities claim the area was hit by heavy rains overnight, but some netizens suspect that a nearby dam secretly released water instead, causing even more severe flooding. Since the start of the flood, people from all over China have told us that they've noticed their local water levels rising dramatically during the nighttime. They also reported rumors that nearby dams had been releasing the water in secret. One user said that authorities won't reveal the truth about the dam, because if they did, they'd have to compensate the locals. But if the reason behind the flooding is merely heavy rain, there's no need to pay them. China's Yangtze River basin has been drenched by severe flooding for around 50 days now. Half of the country's important agricultural provinces have been impacted. Areas of farmland are turning into lakes and crops are soaked. Farmers expect a hugely reduced harvest this year or even no harvest at all. But China's Agriculture Department announced on Friday that the country's supply of grain and other agricultural products is sufficient and that market operation is stable. They also said the country has enough rice and wheat stocks and that grains, vegetables, and meat supplies are all guaranteed for this year. The statement doesn't mention the widespread flooding whatsoever. Now to Wuhan, between the CCP virus originating there and current red level flood alerts, dissatisfaction in the Chinese city of Wuhan seems to be on the rise. A picture from inside the city has gone viral online. In the picture, a white plaque is shown with Chinese characters that reads Wuhan Municipal People's Government. This is the entrance to Wuhan City Hall. Part of the plaque is missing after one woman reportedly cut it off with an axe. She was later taken away by police. Her actions have since received wide recognition and applause online. One Chinese netizen said she is even braver than the bus driver. Only more of these kind of actions can inspire people to revolt. The comment refers to a bus driver who recently drove a bus carrying dozens of passengers into a river in China. It happened after authorities threatened to and later demolished his home. Another netizen commented, history claims this as the first acts in the second Wuchang uprising. Wuchang is one of Wuhan's districts. The Wuchang uprising was an armed rebellion against the ruling of the Qing dynasty some 100 years ago. It marked the beginning of a revolution, which successfully overthrew China's last dynasty. Now we turn to Xinjiang. At least 80% of flights in and out of the capital of China's far western Xinjiang region have been canceled due to the pandemic. Subway transportation has also been shut down. A video posted online showed long waiting lines outside a hospital there on Thursday. All of them were waiting to be tested for the virus. Citizens also started stocking up on food and other essentials on Thursday evening. Some social media users in the city say they've been told not to leave their neighborhoods. The city has been put under a kind of half lockdown. Another video taken Friday shows almost no street traffic in the area. China's official figures report that as of Friday, the city only has 6 confirmed cases and 11 asymptomatic ones. The strict and overwhelming virus response has sparked questions on social media about whether officials are underreporting the true figures. Xinjiang is an autonomous region home to the Uyghur Muslim ethnic group. The area is now under intense state control. The UN estimates 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in re-education camps there. Beijing describes the camps as vocational skill training centers that work to combat so-called extremism. And now to the country's economy. Another listed Chinese company has been forced out of the market due to financial fraud. But this time it wasn't ousted from the New York stock market, but from Shenzhen, China's second largest market after Shanghai. Nearly 50,000 shareholders are reported victims of the fraud. One medical equipment manufacturer in the southern Chinese province of Hunan was involved in this fraud from 2015 to 2017. Its financial reports show that the company's losses from the last 3 years have reached over $500 million. So far, 15 listed companies in China have been forced out of the market this year, mostly due to financial fraud. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese shareholders have suffered because of it. Social media in China is buzzing with rumors that Chinese banks are collapsing. In some areas, lines have piled up with people trying to withdraw their money. Now, local bank regulators and even the police are stepping in to try to calm people down.
Rumors of Chinese banks collapsing have flooded social media in China. In the past month, worried customers have descended on 3 banks to withdraw their money. In Hebei province, local regulators had to step in and vouch for a bank while the police blocked customers. The world's largest banking system was already on shaky grounds after several bailouts and the first bank seizure in 2 decades. The outbreak of the CCP virus, which originated in China, only made things worse. The bank runs in Hebei came after local officials started a pilot program limiting large transactions. It requires clients to report transactions over $14,000. The program will soon expand to 2 more areas in China, Shenzhen and Zhejiang, covering 70 million people. Regulators are also asking banks to forego $200 billion in profit this year to help the economy. S&P Global estimates the Chinese industry could suffer a $1 trillion increase in bad debt as the economy sinks to its lowest point in 4 decades. The People's Bank of China and the China Banking Commission released a joint statement telling customers that their money was safe at the Hebei Bank and urged them not to withdraw. Police took people into custody and criticized them for spreading rumors. Regulators are working on a plan to have small banks merge to become stronger, but not much has happened with the plan so far.
In response to reports of a potential U.S. travel ban on Communist Party members, Beijing said on Friday any such travel ban would mean Washington stands against the entire Chinese population. But the Chinese people took to social media to say they disagree.
China's foreign ministry spokesperson called Washington's potential travel ban against China's ruling Communist Party absurd and said it's against the will of the Chinese and American people. News about the ban provoked heated discussion on China's social media, but most seem to disagree with their spokesperson. A state media account posted the news on the Chinese counterpart of Twitter, Weibo. However, the comments below mostly support the idea of the ban. The most liked comment reads, "This is powerful," indicating the travel ban, and asked Washington, "Please do what you said and don't back down." Other comments include, "This is the best thing the United States has ever done," and "Wow, I guess no ordinary Chinese people would oppose this policy." Some even tagged the account of the U.S. Embassy in China and said, "Please do enforce this." Multiple media reported that the Trump administration is considering banning entry of all Communist Party members, Chinese military personnel, and executives of state-owned companies. NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times China editor Annie Wu said one of the reasons the Chinese people are supporting the ban is they know that the corrupt officials in China will suffer most from it.
Yes, it's quite ironic, but there has been a pattern of Chinese officials transferring their assets overseas. With the political instability inside China, also the economic downturn over the past decade, many officials have moved their children and their families overseas, and usually the hope is that the official will then join the family later and their assets will be safer.
That's why some said by issuing the ban, the U.S. would be helping China with its anti-corruption campaign. One comment called President Trump the head of Anti-Corruption Bureau. Another called him an anti-corruption hero and said we need to rely on the United States for our anti-corruption movement.
I think a large part of the Chinese people are pretty disillusioned with the party ruling. They know that a lot of officials are corrupt, and that's why they've decided to move their assets overseas. So for the ordinary Chinese people who don't have the financial means to move abroad, I think this kind of announcement is kind of funny to them, that the high-level officials end up perhaps being in a bit of trouble there.
U.S. immigration law forbid members of the Communist Party or other totalitarian or terrorist organizations to become U.S. citizens. During the Cold War, communists can't even enter the country, but the U.S. loosened the restriction in the 1990s. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
In China, misinformation and propaganda often creates gaps in communication between family generations. One person, Mr. Ye, told us he feels like a victim of the CCP-made tragedy. Ye is an international student from China. After spending several years in the U.S., he found himself unable to communicate with his parents in China. He says he believes they've been brainwashed by the Communist Party's propaganda. That's because Mr. Ye talks to them about what he's seen, read, and experienced in the U.S. They refuse to listen to him. Ye's time overseas helped him gradually realize the importance of having access to truthful, uncensored information. Ye told us his aversion to the CCP began when he learned about the real meaning of China's 5-starred red flag. Children in China are told from an early age that the country's national flag is dyed with the blood of martyrs. And the large star on the flag stands for the CCP, while the 4 smaller ones represent the party's central leadership. While in college, he often spoke privately with a Christian pastor who explained how the CCP suppresses churches and people's religious faith. In China, only churches that follow the CCP's rules are allowed to exist, but they're still subject to restrictions on their religious freedom. Churches independent of the CCP are completely suppressed. After college, Ye went on to study with a top Chinese expert for his master's degree in an AI-related field. He says he was full of passion at first, but began to think differently after realizing even many Chinese American scientists end up working for the CCP.
I'm not opposed to doing scientific research, I just don't want to do it for the CCP.
In the end, he decided to stay in the U.S. and study the subjects he's most passionate about, theology and filmmaking. When in America, Ye says he's been following NTD News for virus information since the outbreak began in China. According to him, the more he learned about China's virus cover-up, the more his revulsion toward the regime grew.
I've been following the updates from NTD TV since the beginning of the virus outbreak. Now, I've become more and more disgusted by the CCP.
Chinese state-run media underreported China's virus cases and the severity of the situation. Instead, coverage was focused on the pandemic in other countries. As a result, Ye's parents, relatives, and friends in China were led to believe that the U.S. was overrun by the virus, and that China was the safest country with very few positive cases. He explained that they became very worried about him and repeatedly asked him to return to China. But after seeing reports from outside China about what's really happening, including China's current flood disaster and the famine that's likely to follow, he said he doesn't dare to go back.
If I go back and cannot find a job, my parents would have to support me. If I publicly stand up and blame the CCP, I may be arrested. I get anxious about it sometimes, but the anti-CCP trend is getting stronger and stronger.
Ye says he feels sad that he must remain separated from his family while he chooses to stay far away from the regime. Yet he says everyone must keep up their efforts to expose the Communist Party. He says he believes that when the party eventually falls, all that was lost will be regained. Reporting by Gu Xiaohua and Xi Wenhui, NTD News. The White House says President Trump has not ruled out more sanctions on top Chinese officials. This comes after President Trump signed the Hong Kong Autonomy Act on Tuesday. The act allows the president to sanction Chinese officials and banks involved in imposing Beijing's new national security law over Hong Kong. A person familiar with the matter says Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam is among the names being considered. Carrie Lam responded, saying she has no assets in the U.S. and doesn't particularly like visiting. One of Carrie Lam's sons, however, is still in the States as a graduate of Harvard. On top of the U.S., the U.K. is also considering Magnitsky-style sanctions on Carrie Lam and Chinese officials in response to the draconian national security law in Hong Kong. Former Conservative Party leader Ian Duncan Smith told Voice of America Carrie Lam should be on the list, considering she has family with British passports. He is among several British lawmakers calling on the government to take a tougher line on officials in Beijing and Hong Kong. On Wednesday, China's top office in Hong Kong slammed the U.S. response, calling the moves bullying. Beijing has said it will impose retaliatory sanctions against U.S. individuals and entities, and it summoned the U.S. ambassador to China to protest the Hong Kong Autonomy Act. Taiwanese officials in Hong Kong are facing new obstacles in renewing their visas under the new national security law. A person familiar with the matter told Reuters these officials have been told their visas will not be renewed unless they sign a document supporting Beijing's claim to Taiwan under its One China policy. This comes after Taiwan criticized the new national security law in the financial hub. Taiwan also opened an office in Taipei this month to help people who may want to leave Hong Kong. According to another source, Taiwan currently has 15 staff at its consulate in the region. Taiwan is a self-ruling island with its own democratic system, but China has vowed to unify it with the mainland, threatening a vengeful force. Deutsche Bank's Asia office will relocate from Hong Kong to Singapore. The bank's new Asia head decided for Singapore when he takes over the job next month. Deutsche Bank is the biggest German bank with branches in almost 60 countries. Due to the new national security law that Beijing imposed on Hong Kong, freedoms in Hong Kong are restricted, and tensions between the U.S. and China are rising. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speaking at the release of a draft report on human rights. He focused on how America's founders understood unalienable rights and the role of governments in securing them.
The Commission was never intended to time the release of this report to the current societal upheavals that are currently roiling our nation. Nevertheless, the report touches on this moment, and so will I. because today's unrest directly ties to our ability to put our founding principles at the core of what we do as Americans and as diplomats all across the world.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Thursday marked the release of a draft report by the Commission on Unalienable Rights. Pompeo tasked the commission in 2019 with assessing and advising the State Department on how America's unique rights tradition can inform its foreign policy work. In his remarks, Pompeo referred to the unalienable rights stated clearly in the Declaration of Independence, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. God-given rights adopted by America's founders.
These rights, these unalienable rights are essential. They are a foundation upon which this country was built. They are central to who we are and to what we care about as Americans.
Pompeo said that because America was built on this foundation, it is fundamentally good and has a lot to offer the world. But he said these rights and the understanding of them are under attack by outside forces and within the U.S. itself. He singled out the New York Times.
They want you to believe that Marxist ideology, that America is only the oppressors and the oppressed. The Chinese Communist Party must be gleeful when they see the New York Times spout this ideology.
Human rights violations in a number of countries were called out, including Nicaragua, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Iran, Russia, Burma, and North Korea. Particular emphasis was laid upon the Chinese regime, which was also noted by the chair of the Commission on Unalienable Rights.
China, in particular, is aggressively promoting a very different concept in which national priorities of various sorts prevail over the basic rights of speech, assembly, religious freedom, and free elections.
She said some powerful countries are openly challenging the idea that no nation should be immune from outside scrutiny of how it treats its own citizens. But the Commission's report disputes this and concludes that the United States should vigorously promote human rights around the world as part of its foreign policy.
A transnational criminal organization. That's what a human rights committee is urging the U.S. Department of Justice to designate the Chinese Communist Party. The committee says it's time to get bold in calling out the CCP's criminal activity. NTD's Melina Weisskopf spoke to the human rights attorney who drafted the letter to find out what they hope they'll accomplish.
The United States continues cracking down hard on the Chinese Communist Party. U.S. officials like the Attorney General William Barr, the FBI Director, and the National Security Advisor are laying bare what Barr calls predatory and unlawful tactics of the CCP. The Committee on the Present Danger, China, sent an open letter to the Attorney General requesting that the United States designate the CCP as a transnational criminal organization.
And I think it's absolutely critical that they be called out for what they are. And so I went about conducting legal research on the CCP, their criminal activity here in the United States, and what laws we could use to provide sanctions, provide prosecutions.
Examples of criminal activity include stealing American sensitive information through multiple IP hacks. And it goes even further than privacy breaches. The CCP has killed hundreds of thousands of its own citizens through an ongoing brutal persecution of Christians, Uyghurs, practitioners of Falun Gong, and others. The regime also has American deaths to answer for. Chinese sources have been shipping tons of opioids into the U.S., which have killed thousands.
We know that fentanyl originates in China. It's being transferred from China through the Postal Service into the United States.
And most recently, the CCP's cover-up of the virus's human-to-human transmission caused the deaths of 140,000 Americans and counting.
If America takes the lead on this, you will see other countries also follow, because other countries have lost tens and hundreds of thousands of their citizens as a result of what we call the CCP virus.
If the U.S. does label the CCP as a transnational criminal organization, the U.S. could apply more criminal sanctions, freeze financial assets, and set up teams of investigators to track and put an end to the CCP's criminal conduct. Yor says she urges American citizens to use the power of their voices and sign the open letter to stop the CCP's inhumane practices. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And a group in Liechtenstein is pushing for a law that would crack down on human rights violators. The law would deny entry into the country for foreign officials who are involved in human rights abuses.
A group of people gathered to rally in Liechtenstein, a small European country between Austria and Switzerland. The event was held to call for lawmakers' support on a human rights law dubbed the Magnitsky Act. If passed, the law would prevent people who have committed serious human rights violations, like persecuting people of faith, from entering the country. It would also allow their assets to be frozen. The United States passed and signed the Magnitsky Act into law in 2012 after Russian officials allegedly tortured a tax consultant to death in prison. Now, the rally's organizers say it's important for Liechtenstein to follow America's lead.
We want Liechtenstein to follow the good example of the USA and implement the Magnitsky Act. That's why I will submit an appeal to the head of government of Liechtenstein.
The gathering was organized and supported by Falun Gong practitioners. Falun Gong, also called Falun Dafa, is a spiritual meditation practice based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Though it was introduced to the public in China back in 1992, the Chinese regime now brutally persecutes those who practice it, as well as those of other spiritual or religious backgrounds. The rally's organizers are now appealing to lawmakers in hopes they'll implement the act, which would penalize the very officials who enable the persecution of Falun Gong in China. Liechtenstein is known for using its low corporate tax rates to draw in companies from all over the world. That's how the small country became one of the wealthiest worldwide, relative to its purchasing power. The rally's organizer added that it was especially important to implement the law because of the country's strong ties to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP.
Especially in Liechtenstein, it is important that the law is implemented because of the large sums of money flowing into Liechtenstein from CCP officials.
The country's heads of state have received the appeal to implement the law. Liechtenstein's parliament is currently on summer break. Talks will continue when officials return in the fall. NTD, Liechtenstein.
The Trump administration is working to gradually reopen international travel. The U.S. State Department said the U.S. will offer travel exemptions for students from Europe and some au pairs and family members of U.S. visa holders. The U.S. banned travelers from most European countries in March as CCP virus cases soared. The new exemption won't extend to students in China, Iran, or Brazil. They face similar travel bans. Now to the U.S. Embassy in China. The U.S. is working to fully restaff its diplomatic mission in China, which was evacuated back in February due to the outbreak. More than 100 U.S. diplomats and their family members flew back this week, with a second return flight conducted so far. But negotiations hit an impasse after the first flight 2 weeks ago. Among the disagreements are concerns over virus testing and quarantine procedures. Diplomats were told that upon arrival in China, adults and children of all ages should be prepared to take a virus test. But diplomats argue that agreeing to do so violates regulations on diplomatic relations. Huawei's rivals in the UK say they are ready to step in without disrupting customer services. This comes after the UK announced it's banning Huawei from 5G networks. All its networking equipment will be phased out by 2027.
Telecom providers Ericsson and Nokia say they are ready to step in after the UK announced it was phasing out the use of Huawei in 5G networks. The UK's digital minister said Tuesday that telecom providers are banned from buying Huawei equipment starting the end of this year. The US government has claimed that Huawei is a security risk and urged allies to shun its equipment. Both Nokia and Ericsson have said that they can replace all Huawei equipment in the UK's networks. They also say this can be done without any disruption to customer services. In the UK, Huawei currently accounts for around 2/3 of BT's mobile network, 1/3 of Vodafone, and network provider Three UK is only using Huawei. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson initially resisted concerns. He allowed Huawei to roll out a new high-speed network in Britain in January. But things changed in May when the US blocked Huawei's access to US chips. The UK's move is likely to build pressure on other countries to split from Huawei, most notably in Germany. Huawei makes up to 90% of German provider Deutsche Telekom's network equipment. German officials worry that banning Huawei 5G could invite retaliation against German exports by Beijing. Germany is China's second largest exporter after the U.S.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.